Hi everybody, welcome to the unit 6 of the Lunch and Learn series, and today we're going to look at facilitating effective meetings. And actually it's a very important topic. We spend our life in meetings, and once we've finished one meeting we're on to the next one. And so and of course a lot of the meetings we attend are a waste of time, or not terribly productive, or we've all been there, we've all experienced that. So if you're a leader, you're probably likely that you do lead others in meetings. And so therefore the key is to become extremely good at running meetings. And it's not a difficult task at all. And I'm going to share with you some very practical things that you can implement immediately. I know they work because I've implemented them myself in the meetings that I run, and I've certainly witnessed those in the meetings that in organisations that I do work in. So relax and enjoy. There's going to be, of course, a video recording out of this, and also some slides. So you'll get that sent to you this afternoon. Just want to make sure that I'm being heard here. So if people could just indicate in the question box just by typing in the word clear, that would be useful. Otherwise, thanks Jennifer, thanks Helen, thanks Margaret. Great, sounds like okay, good, yep, thank you, excellent. Sounds like I'm coming across loud and clear, which is great. All right, so let's get underway, and let's have a look at the topic and what we're going to be covering in this topic. So you'll be aware, of course, this is our 6th module, and I've enjoyed working with you. I hope you've got something useful out of it. And of course, the whole purpose of this is to do something different between these modules. So I'm hoping that you've gone away and you've applied something, and you've got some good results out of it, and that's the whole name of the game. Otherwise, if nothing changes, then really nothing changes, and that's not good. So we started off right at the beginning talking about effective feedback, and I'm hoping you're still using or you're still giving effective feedback, and feedback can be both positive and negative, but I gave you some tips and hints on how to do that. You completed your influencing capabilities profile in module 2, and the whole purpose of that was to give you an opportunity to look at your influencing profile and to broaden your array of influencing capabilities so that you can influence people that perhaps aren't necessarily influenced the way you are. And then we looked at the importance of conversations around optimizing team performance. And I think my personal view is that conversations are very underestimated as an important leadership tool. And I think the point I'm making to you there is that you should be having more and more developmental and performance conversations. We talked about some of the motivational theory that's out there, the reputable theory around getting the very best from the people that you lead, and I would argue that that's probably your primary responsibility. And the key message out of Module 4 was that you need to be using autonomy, mastery, and purpose when you're leading knowledge workers, giving people the freedom and autonomy to make decisions, giving them an opportunity to master their skill set, and providing them with the purpose of why you want something done the way you want it to be done. Then in Module 5, we had some fun around understanding people and their personalities, and I hope you had a chance to have a little bit of a giggle to yourself and also have a look around your workplace at some of the different personality types, and more importantly, that you've actually tried to apply some different approaches depending on the people that you deal with. And it was based on the platinum rule, which is, of course, treat people how they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated. The golden rule, of course, is treat people how you want to be treated. And today, of course, we're going to look at effective meetings. So I hope you had a chance to since 2 weeks ago, I hope you've had a chance to have a bit of fun with the personality profile and had a look around the workplace and started to try some different things and hopefully got some breakthroughs with people that you might not normally have worked effectively with. So, bear in mind, peacocks like recognition, uh, the the bulls like to be in charge, the owls like perfection, and of course the lambs are very compliant and peacemakers. So treating people how they want to be treated is the name of the game, of course, in that regard. And as I said, it's the gold, treating people how they want to be treated, not the golden rule, treat people how you want to be treated. So what are we doing today? I want to talk about the context of meetings. I think we need to set some background as to meetings and how many we have and how important they are. Talk about some structure around meetings and how you should structure your meetings for maximum benefit. Talk about some interpersonal and leadership skills that are required from a person actually running the meeting. And I want to share with you some of the ideas that I know work really well to enhance or enrich your meetings so that they become a pleasure to attend rather than, a drudgery, which is often the case. All right, so look, the first thing I'd say about meetings is this, when it comes up on your screen, there it is, and that is this. Getting good at running productive meetings, I think, is one of the most critical and untapped skills of any leader. I don't think any of us work anywhere near hard enough to make sure that our meetings are productive. And I don't mean necessarily enjoyable, although that's probably not a bad thing, but certainly productive. And I think that considering the number of meetings we go to, I think it's a small price to pay to work hard at becoming good at running meetings. And after all, if you think about it, it's courteous. The fact of the matter is there are a number of people who are in that meeting who could be somewhere else, doing something else, and the least you could do, of course, is to make those meetings productive and relevant to the participants that are there at the time. So that's the basis upon which we're looking at this topic. All right. Now, another insight I'd give you is this, that meetings themselves are not productive. All right, I've just said you need to be running productive meetings, but the meetings themselves are not productive. It's actually what happens or doesn't happen between the meetings that determine the effectiveness of the meeting. So meetings are really a way of being able to build or plan for the future. So it's what happens between the meetings that's critically important. The meetings are used often to organise what needs to happen. So think about it that way, that if nothing happens between meetings, then no matter how enjoyable or entertaining the meetings are, the reality is they're not really very productive because nothing's changed. So meetings are a change agent. It's about getting people to do things that perhaps they may not do otherwise in between meetings. So just a thought, you might want to think that through a bit more. So what are meetings for? And I think that I've categorized here a number of different rationale for meetings. Meetings can be there to inform people, perhaps of a new system, a new process, something, new curriculum. The meetings can be there for those sorts of purposes to inform people. They can be there to educate people, which is a little bit more active than informing. So this is around giving people perhaps some capabilities, some skill sets. So you could argue that what we're doing right now is a meeting. It's just an online meeting, but it's about education. Meetings can be there to clarify situations. So this is where there might be a number of different viewpoints or perhaps some confusion about direction. So we decide to hold a meeting to clarify the situation and how people should look at a set of circumstances. Meetings are there to engage people, so this might be about getting people to collaborate around a decision. So we use meetings to get people to participate in a range of different solutions to some challenging problems. I should say, incidentally, I think that that fourth point, engagement, is really not done particularly well. I think we tend to use meetings to inform, but we don't really use meetings to engage. And you'll see that I'll talk more about that later. Meetings are there to resolve or solve collective problems. So if we've got some sort of an issue where there's a number of people in the meeting that are directly related to that particular issue, then they might be called there to look at resolving the issue. Meetings are also there to review progress. So what we're actually aiming to do in the meeting is to find out how people have been performing. So we might call these a work in progress. So these meetings are really to do a quick round table, who's doing what's happened between the last meeting and this meeting, and there needs to be a bit of that, but I think there are too many meetings around reviewing progress and informing, and very few around the other things. And of course, meetings are there to make decisions. So we can collectively make decisions, or the leader can make a decision based on the feedback that they receive in the meeting. So there's a range of reasons that we have meetings. So I think the first thing is to be very clear about what the purpose of your meeting is. Why would you bother to get these people together? Hopefully it's not just because it's Tuesday at 3 o'clock and that's when we normally have our meeting. But there is a very real reason that you can argue as to why we do that. All right, now this information on the cost of meetings. How much does it cost for us to have these meetings? Now, of course, in the budget, we don't allocate the costs against meetings. We don't have a line item called organisational meetings. Probably a good thing, because it would be quite a serious cost if we considered it. Let's have a look at it for a moment. All right, so here's a couple of questions I'd like to ask you, and it wouldn't be difficult for you to work this out, and perhaps I might even challenge you. If you are in an organisation and you're a leader who really is looking at improving productivity, a good place to start is with your meetings. So, for example, what's the average income of your team per hour? So, let's say you have a team meeting once a week. What is the average hourly rate for each person in that team? How many meetings on average does your team members attend per week? All right, so if your team members might attend 4 one-hour meetings a week, for example, or more, probably more, I'd say. Typically, how long do those meetings last? Well, sometimes they can last more than an hour. Very rarely, in my experience, they last less than an hour. So you work out the amount of hours that people spend in meetings a week, and then you multiply that number by 2. Why? Because there's an opportunity cost for attending a meeting. When you attend a meeting, when I attend a meeting, and the meeting we're in right now, there's an opportunity cost. You could be working on something else, but you've elected to be here in Unit 6. Now you could be somewhere else. In other words, not only can I not be doing something else while I'm in the meeting, but also I'm not doing justice to something else, and so therefore if I'm spending an hour in a meeting, I've actually lost 2. Well, 1 hour being at the meeting and another hour that I've lost by not being able to attend to something else. So you work that out, and it's pretty scary. So if you had a team of 6 people, you can work that out, and you'd be quite surprised at the cost you could actually quantify against people attending meetings. That in itself, of course, isn't a problem. provided, of course, that people are getting benefit from their meetings and that it is worthwhile. Let's have a look at this. Let's put some numbers on it. Let's say, and I'm going to be very conservative here, let's say, for example, that the average income for your team members is $31.25 an hour, right? That's what people, when you break down people's salaries, that's what it ends up being. Let's say that you attend 5 meetings a week, which I don't think would be an unreasonable number. It's probably likely to be more, closer to 10 than 5, but let's say 5. Let's say that the typical meeting will last for about 2 hours. So basically, of a normal 40-hour week, a person in our team is spending 25% of their time in meetings, that is 10 hours a week. All right, so we've established it's 10 hours a week, and we've also established that we've got 6 people in our team. And we've also established, of course, that we can't be doing something else while we're doing the, while we're sitting in the meetings. Now that's a significant cost. So the question is, are we getting good value for money? So, if you're interested in doing a purge on your meetings at work, a good place to start is to do a calculation like this and to demonstrate how much it's actually costing you to be able to be having meetings. All right, so 6 people, it's actually costing you, believe it or not, over a course of a year, $195,000 Australian to have to attend meetings a year. That's what's your team. So imagine if you had a team budget, and in that budget it had team meetings and it had $195,000 against that line item. You'd probably query that, wouldn't you? I would, and I'm sure others would as well. So you can see that it's quite costly, but we don't really go around quantifying it, so it's not so obvious. What about another example? This is a scary example. Let's say your organisation has 1,000 people in it, 1,000 employees in your organisation. Well, if there's 1,000 people in your organisation and those figures that I've just shown you were extrapolated across the organisation, we're talking about $32.5 million a year to attend meetings. That's a significant amount, right? Imagine if we were spending $32.5 million marketing the products and services. Imagine if we were spending $32.5 million opening up a new market. That money could be spent in lots of different ways. So the question we've got to ask is, are we getting good value for money from our team meetings? And I think the answer to that, in my view at least, is no, we're not. And that we need to do something about that. So how do we we either reduce the number of meetings we attend or we improve the quality of those meetings that we attend. Probably both would be good. So here's a couple of really important tips on meetings that I really strongly urge you to consider. Now this first one's a bit controversial because there's a bit of a trend out there to rotate the chair. So what we do is we get everybody in the team to have a go at chairing the meeting. I don't think that's a good idea at all. Why? Because not everybody likes doing it. Some people will dread it. It probably won't be done particularly well because obviously you've got people chairing meetings that aren't used to doing that. And as a result of that, you might say, well, that's good personal development. Yes, but all the while the meeting suffers. So I think it's the job of the leader to chair the meeting. And I think if you're a leader, you should be chairing those meetings. Why? Well, it's part of your job. And secondly, hopefully your skill set is sufficient to be doing a reasonably good job at that meeting. So I don't think I understand why people rotate the chair, because what they're trying to do, of course, is to get people involved and engaged more so in the meeting. I think you can do that just by chairing the meeting properly. You don't need to rotate the chair. So not a good idea. And then some people forget it's their turn, and other people decide to barter with other people when they can chair the meeting, and it kind of gets sloppy, and you end up, having to monitor what's happening with the chairing of the meeting. So just don't do it. Just become extremely good at chairing meetings is my strong advice to you. Now, I think the other thing I would say is that you should be aiming for, generally speaking, if it's a run-of-the-mill meeting, 50% reporting and 50% discussion. So what normally happens, of course, in meetings is it's around 85% reporting and 15% discussion. And that, in my view, that's not a good use of time. I think you're far better to reduce the reports to the basics, reduce the reporting, and then plonk on the table an important issue that needs to be discussed, where you want involvement from everybody. So that could be professional development. It could be an issue that's occurred last week that needs to be discussed and debriefed. It could be a project coming up in the future. There's lots of things that can be discussed in a meeting, and in fact, a meeting can be a very good forum for those things. So try to put on the agenda item things where you can actually create a dialogue in the meeting. So you don't have to resolve the world's problems, but some sort of a dialogue about an issue that's affecting the team's performance is a good thing to discuss in a meeting. And you'll find that people will engage and enjoy the meeting more if they feel that they've been part of the dialogue. Some people, of course, will sit there quietly and say nothing, but they'll feel a sense of engagement because they've been involved in a meeting that's not a leader-centric meeting. In other words, it's a participant-centric meeting. It's a meeting around the people sitting around the table rather than the person sitting at the head of the table. Another strong piece of advice that I would give you is that you should use critical incidents. Now, I've talked a fair bit about this during the Lunch and Learn, but at the end of the day, what you can use the meetings for is to debrief on a critical incident. Now, this isn't about embarrassing anybody at the meeting or pointing fingers of blame or anything else, and you've got to be sometimes tactful about how you might broach this subject. And in fact, you might set up some ground rules at the beginning to suggest that it's not a personal attack on anybody, and we're not really here to apportion any blame, but rather to learn from each other about how we might have done things different, faster, better, easier. All right, so the question then is, what do you discuss? Well, there's a lot of things. What about an incident that went extremely well? Why did it go well? What sort of things occurred to create a good project? How could you use those learnings in the future for future projects? What would you have done differently if you'd had your time over again? That's all good learning, and that's all open for conversation. I think I might have shared with you previously about the after action review. So there's 3 key questions that are useful when you're debriefing a critical incident. What went well? Now, even if it was a disaster, something has probably gone well. What didn't go well? It's highly likely something didn't go well, no matter how good it is. And the third and most important question is, what will we do differently as a result of what we've learned? Very powerful. So going back to Unit 2 on influencing capabilities, you are incorporating both the you are incorporating collaboration, and you're probably incorporating a bit of investigation, and you might even be incorporating a little bit of motivation. So that's likely to be very, very effective. So use critical incidents to debrief. And of course, if you've got projects coming up in the future, you're probably going to discuss them as well. I don't think that's such a problem. I think people do that generally pretty well. but I don't think what they do is they go back and look at the past. Usually people are so busy they're moving on to the next big thing, but I would strongly urge you to go back and consider how something else could have been done and more effectively in the past. It's very important that you use meetings to clarify people's roles. Now, you might be surprised to know that the people in your team probably aren't as crystal clear about everybody's role around the table as you might like. And particularly if it's a cross-functional team, so a team of people who have come from various departments or agencies in an organisation will not be familiar with what the role of all the participants around the table are. So what I strongly urge you to do is to use your meetings as an educative tool. So in other words, what you do is you get each person, not at the same meeting, but at each meeting, to give a brief presentation about what their particular role entails and any other information that might be relevant. So you actually get people in your meeting to share, just for a couple of minutes, to share with other people what their key and roles are, what some of the challenges they face, and maybe ways that others can help them. So you can frame it up that way if you wish. So getting people to share their role in a meeting is critically important. We hugely overestimate our understanding of what other people do at work, and yet we don't really know. And that's not really helpful for that person, because if I don't know what someone does, I may well be very critical of them because I might be assuming that I think I know, that they should be doing X or Y and they're not. So use the meetings to clarify the roles of people. Use the meeting to clarify your role as a team. Could I go to any of your team members and ask them what the primary role of your team is? I'm sure I could, but what would I get back? Would I get an answer back that you'd be happy with? Would I get similar answers from everyone? Or would I get disparate type of responses from various people? So clarify what the role is about the team. And if you don't know what the role is, then there's your discussion. Let's talk about it. Let's do a team values charter. Let's talk about what our role is in the organisation. Now, standing meetings are outstanding, if I can use that slight play on words. Standing meetings get things done faster. So if you decide to have a stand-up meeting, you'll find that people, strangely enough, get to the point a lot quicker, that we have less waffle, and that people can actually get stuff done faster because I guess people just don't like standing around. So certainly it's very useful in a production area at the beginning of a shift where people can be briefed on a range of things. Any issues can be aired and raised at that meeting, and the meetings could literally go for 10 minutes or 15 minutes at the beginning of a shift. In a professional services firm may not be quite so simple, but I still think there's a place for stand-up meetings that can be quite relevant. So have a think about that and how you might, if you can, incorporate that in your meetings. Now, it is important to have an agenda, absolutely. And in fact, if it's worth meeting, it's worth having an agenda. Now, obviously, if you have an impromptu meeting, you're not going to have an agenda, at least written, and that's fine. But if you have a weekly meeting or a fortnightly meeting or even a monthly meeting, you should have an agenda. And the agenda should vary each meeting. And it's no good just, photocopying the last agenda and changing the date. Start thinking about how you can make that agenda relevant at that point in time. So couple of things about agendas that are really useful. Yes, it is good to get input from your team about what sort of things they want to discuss on the agenda. I find most people are reluctant to put things on the agenda, but if you don't ask, they're certainly not going to consider it. So ask people for agenda items. That becomes really important. Secondly, have the most important business first on the agenda. Why? Well, because if you run out of time, you haven't run out of time on the important things. So it's quite possible that you'll run out of time. So what's the most important item of business? That should be number one on the agenda. And what's the second most important item on the agenda? That should be number two, and so forth. So that's another key point. Three, one little tip that I know works extremely well, and for some strange reason people are reluctant to do it, is start your meetings at strange times. Instead of having it at 4 p.m, why don't you have it at 3:55? All right, 3:55. Now, what's the implication of that? Well, it means that we are expected to be on time, and if people work a little bit harder to be there on time. And that reminds me, when it is 3:55, you start the meeting, right? You just start the meeting. If you sit there for half an hour waiting for the stragglers to roll in, all you're doing is rewarding poor behaviour. Those people think I'm so important, they couldn't have started the meeting without me. Wow, and they get a sugar hit. Just start the meeting. They'll have to catch up. Another thing that works really well for agendas is after each item on your agenda, have in brackets the amount of time you expect each item to take. So, for example, if I'm going to have a discussion about a new IT system that's going to be put in place next Monday, I think I would anticipate about 20 minutes on that. So I'd have bracket 20, close of bracket. So what that means is that on that agenda item, I am in a strong position then to say to people, if they're being a bit verbose, is you need to cut it short because I've only allowed 20 minutes for this item. So you can say that with great legitimacy because you've planned that you're only going to spend 20 minutes on that item. All right. So you'll find, interesting enough, when you do that, that other people in the meeting will honour that commitment that you have made for each agenda item, and they'll be less verbose. They'll get straight to the point, and you'll find that things will run far smoothly. So that helps a lot. The idea of general business, well, trouble is when you open things up for general business, anything could come up. And I think that it's a bit of laziness in a way, because if you've given people an opportunity to get things on the agenda, then really most items should be items on the agenda. So just be careful with that general business. But of course, at the end, you can easily ask somebody. You can ask people if they've got any questions, any other comments, anything that needs to be mentioned that hasn't already been mentioned. Of course, that's reasonable. But you know, it's also an opportunity for people to sabotage the meeting if you haven't asked people for input on the agenda. Now, the other thing that I think is very useful in a meeting, it's often not done, is to delegate to one person in the meeting to make a summary of all the key things that have come out of the meeting. Now, some people have got a natural aptitude for this. And what that means is that they will do an extremely good job. So you just say to Fred, do you mind capturing all the key points? Now, that's not necessarily taking the minutes. I don't necessarily mean that. It's more around a recap at the end of the key points that have been raised during the meeting. And I think that's very helpful because it's fresh in people's mind what needs to happen as a result of this meeting between now and the next meeting. So that could be a very helpful for you as well. That's what I've just said there, yeah. So summarise at the end of the meeting is a good idea. And unfortunately, that's not done, and people are left hanging and they can't remember what the first item was on the agenda. let alone a summary of what happened. So there are some people, as I say, who have a natural tendency to be very good at breaking things up into bite-sized chunks of activity, and I would just approach them to do that. And then what I'd be saying to them at the end is, do you mind just going over the key points that we basically have discussed in this meeting? So that's a good thing to do. Now, the other thing I would say to you is that, meeting effectiveness is something you just need to keep in mind, that the longer the meeting goes, the less effective the meeting will be. So in other words, the first part of the meeting, people's energy levels are usually at their highest. They're usually at their most receptive and most interested in contributing. So 1 hour meetings are a good rule of thumb, I think. But if you go beyond an hour, just be aware that the second and even the third, if there's such a thing, hour are likely to be nowhere near as productive as that first hour of the meeting. So it's worth considering as well. Now, the other thing I'd say to you is how you set the room up for your meetings. And I'd give some thought to that. Now, of course, some of you just don't have any choice. You've got a boardroom and that's that. But all of these different configurations are critically important to the atmosphere that you're trying to create in a meeting. So, for example, if we start at the top left-hand side and go clockwise, we've got theatre style, where you've got everybody sitting in rows, and you have a group of people out the front behind a table. Classic shareholders meeting. And the strength of this meeting, of course, is that the spotlight is clearly on those 4 people at the head table, and it's likely that they will be doing the most contributing. So on a panel discussion, they're likely to be the ones that are going to get the most questions fired at them and do the most talking. The weakness of that, of course, is that it does stifle collaboration and discussion, because everyone's pointing in a direction and they're in rows, which adds a degree of formality to the whole circumstance. So it's highly likely that that's not going to be productive to cross functional conversation. The second one there, the classroom style, is one of the advantages of the classroom style, of course, is that people have got they've got something to lean on. That is a desk to write. So if people have got to take lots of notes or record things on their laptop, this is a very good way of doing it. So in a conference style, I've seen this set up this way, where you've got a presenter out the front and you've got a number of different, you've got people sitting behind desks, rows and rows back. So the strength of this, of course, is that. The weakness, of course, is that, again, it doesn't offer itself to collaboration between the participants at the meeting. The U shape, which is very popular and has been for a period of time for workshopping, means that the people are sitting facing each other in most cases, and this is a good thing because it will facilitate more conversation. I personally don't like this setup when I'm doing workshops because it just looks a little formal for me. I like to break it down into the what we call the cabaret style, if we've got enough people, that is. But nevertheless, the advantage of this U shape is that it does, you'll get far more collaboration and conversation between the participants this way than you would otherwise. The disadvantage is it looks a little bit formal, and I think it's a little bit dated, but that's just a personal view. But normally when you go to a motel and you don't give them instructions as to how you want the room set up, it's not uncommon for them to set it up in theatre style, classroom style, or U-shaped style, but they're not always ideal. Then you've got the conference table down there. We'll go the left-hand side. So we've got the conference table. So that's where people are sitting around a boardroom table. they're facing each other and they can contribute. And this is an excellent configuration where you want to get conversation occurring between members of a team. And sometimes, of course, you won't have any option because that's where you meet in the conference room. And of course, if you've got somebody beamed in, or that have to, that can't be at the meeting physically, you can you can have them in the middle, or the technology in the middle, so that everyone can hear them. So that's quite a good configuration. The weakness of that is that it's still a little formal, and as a result of that, you may not get the same level of participation that you might be hoping for. Now, the cabaret style is great in the sense that you've got people sitting around tables, so they can bring their laptop or their writing pad, take notes, and it's quite good if you're presenting, because you can stop at any time and say to the group, talk amongst your team about some of the points I've just raised, and you'll find that that'll happen inevitably and very well. And it's a great way to manage that process, because you can call upon each table to give some feedback or make some comments that might be relevant to the discussion. So that's a good style. My favourite personally is the cabaret style, because you've got people facing each other, and it's excellent for group work. You can do a bit of social engineering and make sure that the various people that you want at the table are sitting at the table. You use name tags for that. And I've done this where I've actually sat people that don't get on very well with each other at the table, because they wouldn't sit there otherwise. Of course, they'd go and sit with their comfortable peers. So I've actually got people sitting with people who don't necessarily like each other, and I've got them there for a day or two, depending on how long it is. And often that can break down misunderstandings as such. So be aware that the different configurations of meetings will have different ramifications. Use guest speakers, and you don't have to get in the $5,000 an hour speaker at your meetings. And you might say, well, I only got 6 people in the meeting. Well, why can't you get somebody from outside your team to speak? What about HR? Have they got something useful to tell the team? Have you got someone in marketing that might be useful? Is there somebody who has a particular skill or knowledge, or has attended a conference, who might be perfect to come and speak to your team and give a brief presentation on what they got from the conference? What about your own team? I mentioned before, you can certainly use your own membership and actually rotate that so that everybody in the team has an opportunity to present at a meeting. So that can be highly interactive and very, very powerful. Instead of rotating the chair, I think getting each person to give a brief presentation to their colleagues about a particular topic can be very, very useful. Okay. Now, a couple of skills for you as the leader of these meetings. There are 2 challenges that you face. How do you shut people up, and how do you get people to talk? Essentially, there are 2 challenges that most people in leadership roles have when they're chairing meetings. Paraphrasing is the way to shut people up. So what you do is, the moment that they draw breath, you say, so in other words, Fred, what you excuse me, what you're meaning to say is blah, blah, blah. Now that does a couple of things. One, it checks to see whether you have actually understood what the speaker has said, because if Fred thinks you've got it wrong, he will correct you. Unfortunately, that's going to take a bit of time. Or if Fred thinks you've got it right, he will acknowledge that. So that's one good thing. The second thing is, it lets the speaker, that is the person who made the contribution, know that you have actually spent time listening to them. And that could be very useful as well. The third and often misunderstood reason for paraphrasing is so that you can move the conversation on. Because what you've done, in a sense, is you've put a boundary around what they've said, psychological boundary, because you've paraphrased. So you can now move the meeting on. You now have control of the meeting because you've taken the time to summarise or paraphrase what the person has said. So that's a good thing. So that's a very powerful technique to get people to not be verbose in a meeting. Now, the other challenge, of course, that we've got is how do you get everybody involved in your meeting? Because sometimes people will just sit there quietly. The natural introverts may not say much, and the extroverts are dominating the meeting. So, how do you get people to contribute? I think the best way of doing this is actually to ask people for a contribution. So, and you can do this very skillfully. So, for example, if Mary is sitting in the meeting and Mary hasn't said anything and you know that everybody else has said something, it's quite reasonable for you as the chair to say, Mary, is there anything you would like to add that hasn't already been said? So, in other words, I'm giving Mary an entree to contribute in the meeting. Now, she might say, no, everything's covered, or I don't have anything that I want to add. That's fine. And, you can't force somebody to say anything, but the psychology of doing that is very interesting. By asking or inviting Mary to make a contribution, what you've really signalled to every single member in that team is that you expect everybody to contribute. So another quiet person sitting in the corner might think, wow, all of a sudden the chair might be asking me for a contribution, and I think I should preempt that and make a contribution before I'm asked. So it's a very good way of involving everybody by directly asking them for a contribution. And that's fair and reasonable because people can still say, can't they, no, I don't have anything I want to add. That's fine. But you'll often find that people will add something as a result of you asking. They've just been waiting to be asked because they've already been thinking about it. So that's a great way to involve other people in your meetings. It works really well. And as I said, everyone else gets a clear message that they are supposed to contribute to the meeting, and it's really not just to be monopolised by one or two people who like to hear their voices. So the whole purpose, what you're trying to do as the chair of the meeting, is to get every single person to make a contribution. That should be one of your goals at the meeting. So if you walk out of the meeting and one person hasn't said anything, you have to ask yourself the question, why have they not said anything? Is it because they haven't felt they deserve to be there? And of course you can follow that up. You can ask those people, you were very quiet in there. Jeremy, was there anything that you wanted to say that perhaps you didn't say? So they tell you in the corridor. That's all right. That's all right because it could be quite relevant. But they certainly feel as if you are showing an interest in them because you are, and that in itself can be very powerful. Now, you can start your meetings off with a team values charter, and I think I've sort of touched upon this in previous units, but something I put together in one of my books, The New Influencing Toolkit, is you can actually start by going around the table to comment on these 5 questions. So you actually ask people to write the answers to these questions, and this is enormously powerful. So don't be deceived by it. It can work extremely well if you're trying to build a team in the early stages. And you yourself need to have an answer for each of these questions as well, and you start the process. So you ask these questions, you ask people to write the answers down as you ask the questions. So you need to spend, say, 15 to 20 minutes to give everyone a chance to write the answers. You might think, well, Can they do it before the meeting? Well, some will turn up and say, I forgot, and then you're back to square one. So do it in the meeting. And the first question is, what is one value that is important to you when we meet as a team? Now, let's say I might write down the word respect, okay? And that's just a word. So my next question is, what does it mean? And I might write down, well, respect means to me to feel that my contribution is worthy, right? That's my definition of respect. Why is it important? So I might write down, respect is important to me because I want to feel as if I have something useful to contribute in a team environment. You see how it works? What behaviours would demonstrate that value? Well, if someone was showing respect, then they would let me finish what I'm saying without interrupting me, even if they disagree with my point of view. All right? What behaviours would violate that value? Would be the opposite, of course, where somebody's interrupted me on the assumption that they think they knew what I was going to say. Now, you get that done, and then what you do is you go round the table and you ask each person to contribute to the discussion, right? Now, you'll find this is a really, really good thing to do. Now, I've been able to implement this in some of the toughest workplaces you could imagine, and people have walked out feeling really good about it. And what you're actually in essence doing is you're collecting a set of values which you would then call a team values charter. So in other words, there might be 6 or 7 values that you can uphold. And I've actually seen executive leadership teams actually frame those values and put them on the wall where they meet, so that if anyone violates any of those values, then not only can the leader say something about it, but anyone else in the team can say something, and people often do. And when you know it's really working well is when people are willing to say something about it. I don't think that's consistent with that value or whatever, or I don't think you were showing respect there. That's actually a good thing, because it's now creating a self-regulating team that's willing to hold itself accountable for the important things that come out of that. So that's useful. Now, one of the best things that you can do, and it just staggers me how few teams do this, I just don't get it. Why not start every single meeting that you have with a win for the week? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you just go around the table and you ask people for a win for the week. Now, the first time you do this, people will look at you very strangely, and they probably won't have one ready, but they'll probably talk to you about the problem of the week. That's the trouble, isn't it? We're all programmed to be thinking about problems. What about something that went well for the week? Now, this could be either work-related or not, so it doesn't have to be work-related. And you will find you've got to start again. I set the example. So you come into the meeting thinking about a win for the week, and then you say, well, I had a win for the week, and there it is. And then you go around the table. You'll find some really incredible things will occur. One is it'll create an upward spiral of positivity, which is precisely how you should want your meetings to begin. 2, it'll keep you extremely well informed, both personally and work-wise, about what people see as important. 3, it gives people a chance to boast about something that they've achieved for the week. 4, it gives people a chance to learn something about each other and their interests and so forth. 5, you can use it as a learning experience where somebody said something and you might say, well, how can we all use that to our advantage in our own work? It's so simple. It will take you 5-10 minutes to do, go around the table, and boy, does it create something positive. Now, if you're sufficiently senior in your organisation, you should be setting a standard that all meetings, no matter what they are, start with a win for the week. And if you just did that and nothing more out of today's webinar, trust me, it would be worth it. But we're all going to talk about the problems. So, I mean, why aren't we going to talk about the wins? Surely. And of course, if someone's sitting there going, oh, I can't really think of anything. Well, that's a bit strange, isn't it? A whole week, nothing positive happened in the whole week. Well, that's all the more reason why we need to be talking about wins for the week, because they haven't been thinking about anything positive. You'll find that it'll, after about the second or the third iteration of this third meeting, it will go really well, and people can't wait to come to your meeting to tell you the win for the week. All right? So there's something that you might like to consider. So guys, that brings us pretty much to the end. Your homework, as you could probably imagine, is to implement some new approaches to your meetings. So what can you do to assist to improve the quality of the meetings that you lead? What can you suggest for other people in other teams to improve the quality of the meetings that are held? Remember, they're expensive, and there is an obligation, I think, on the leader's part to try to make them as effective as possible. So there you go. So guys, that brings us to a close. I've enjoyed very much working with you over the 6 modules. I've had some lovely feedback, and I've really appreciated that. And obviously, people have told me some of their war stories and things that are going on. That's very much appreciated. So we've covered 6 modules, and I would say to you that if there's anyone else in your organisation who you think would benefit from the Lunch and Learn series, be aware that I have a new series commencing on the 19th of January. And if you go to the website that's in front of you, you can actually register now and pay online. Or if you don't want that to happen, you can just ask me. I can send you an invoice and we can do it that way. But either way, we'd love to see some of your colleagues join the Lunch and Learn series early and just get the new year started off with a bang. So don't hold back on that. Let people know. And if you want more information about what the modules are about, not so much for your purposes because you understand how it works, but for other people that may be curious, then let me know and I can send you out a flyer and you can pass that on. So I've really enjoyed working with you all. Thank you. And I think the key thing for you now is to make sure that you hold yourself true to the learnings that you've got from this particular, this particular learning experience, and try to continually set yourself small goals each day to build up your capacity to lead, because it'll make a big difference, and you'll enjoy your work more too. So thanks, guys. I've enjoyed working with you, and if you've got any feedback, love to hear it, and thank you for your participation. All the very best. Thank you, and goodbye.